held the pen, ready to sign away the ranch's water rights and a $2 million check. My mother-in-law hovered behind me, practically breathing down my neck. Suddenly, Elena, the escrow officer, knocked over a stack of files. As she bent down, she pressed a folded note into my palm. I opened it under the table. "It's a trust trap. Don't sign." My blood ran cold. I dropped the pen, faking a violent coughing fit, and rushed out to my truck. When my mother-in-law finally realized what I had done, her empire was already burning. Sitting in the driver's seat of my heavy-duty truck, my hands gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a bruised shade of white. My breathing was jagged, tearing through the suffocating quiet of the cab. I stared blindly through the dusty windshield at the brick facade of the notary office, desperately trying to process what had just happened. $2 million in liquid cash and the official deeds to the Heritage Ranch water rights. In the sprawling, unforgiving landscape of the American West, water isn't just a utility you pay a monthly bill for. It is absolute power. It is survival. Without those specific water rights, our thousands of acres of prime Montana grazing land were nothing but dead, useless dirt. It was the lifeblood of the equestrian empire I had spent the last decade building from the ground up. I had broken my back for that land, shoveling stalls in the freezing, bitter winters, pulling foals in the dead of night, bleeding for every single inch of it while my husband played the charming cowboy for the cameras. And I was about to sign it all away with a single stroke of a pen. People might wonder what kind of fool hands over her entire life's work to her mother-in-law. They might call me naive, but they don't know the absolute terror of watching everything you love stand on the precipice of ruin. The nightmare hadn't started this morning under the fluorescent lights of the escrow office. It started last night. The evening had been brutally quiet. The mountain wind was howling across the plains, rattling the antique glass windows of the main house. I was standing in the kitchen, exhausted to my bones, scrubbing the dirt and horse grime off my hands after a grueling 14-hour shift in the breeding barns. That was when Liam burst through the heavy oak front door. He looked like he had seen a ghost. On his usually perfectly styled hair was a wild mess, and his face was drained of all color, pale and slick with sweat. He didn't even stop to take off his muddy boots. He just marched straight into the kitchen and slammed a thick, intimidating stack of legal papers onto the granite island. "Sarah." "It's over," he choked out, his voice trembling so perfectly, so authentically that I felt my own heart drop straight into my stomach. He looked at me with wide, panicked eyes. "The State Land Management Bureau. They're coming for us." I dried my hands with a towel, a sudden icy dread washing over my tired body. "What are you talking about, Liam?" He shoved the heavy stack of papers toward me. It was a court summons, complete with official state seals, barcodes, and dense legal jargon that blurred before my exhausted eyes. And they're suing the LLC for historical ecological violations. Violations from decades before we even took over the management. He ran a trembling hand over his face, playing the part of a broken, desperate man flawlessly. "They're demanding millions in back taxes and environmental fines, Sarah. The lawyer just called me. He said the state judge is issuing an emergency freeze order tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. They're going to lock all our corporate bank accounts. They're going to seize the water rights to pay the penalties. They will chain the front gates of the ranch by noon." The room started to spin violently. All my sacrifices, all the years of prioritizing the herd over my own health, my own family, vanishing in an instant because of some faceless bureaucratic nightmare. I leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, my chest tight, gasping for air. "We have to fight it, Liam. We can't just let them take our home. We have the best lawyers in the state." That was when he moved in for the kill. He closed the distance between us and wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight against his chest. I could hear his heart beating fast, a steady, calculated rhythm of pure deception. "There is one loophole," he whispered into my hair. his voice smooth and urgent. A temporary fix to hide the core assets before the federal freeze hits the system. We transfer the liquid cash, the $2 million, and the water deeds into a blind family trust. My mother will be the sole trustee. I pulled back slightly, frowning. Martha? But she hates the ranch. That's exactly why it works, Sarah. He gripped my shoulders, his eyes pleading. And her name isn't anywhere on the ranch's LLC documents. The state investigators can't touch her personal assets. It's a completely legal maneuver to shield our property. Once the lawsuit is settled and we clear our name in court, we dissolve the trust and transfer it all right back. He pulled me close again, kissing my forehead. I need you to trust me. I've already called in a favor and set up an emergency meeting with the escrow officer for first thing in the morning. We have to do this to save our legacy. I hadn't slept a single wink that night. I had blindly followed him into that office this morning, terrified of losing my ranch, ready to sign away the very soul of my business. Because I love this land more than life itself. Because I truly believed he loved it too. But sitting in my truck now, the cold air from the vents biting my face, Elena's crumpled note burned a hole in my palm. It's a trust trap. The catastrophic lawsuit, the late-night panic, the desperate urgency. It was all a meticulously crafted lie, a masterpiece of psychological manipulation designed to strip me of everything I owned, handed over willingly on a silver platter. It's a trust trap. Don't sign. The words blurred together on that tiny, crumpled piece of paper in my palm. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I thought Martha could hear it echoing in the quiet room. I looked up at Elena. Her eyes were glued to her computer screen, but her jaw was locked tight, a silent, desperate plea for me to understand. Martha tapped her manicured fingernails against the heavy mahogany desk, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet impatience she reserved only for me. Sarah, darling, we don't have all day. The state agents could be locking our gates right now. I had to get out of there. I couldn't just walk away. Martha would physically block the door or immediately call Liam to drag me back. I needed a distraction, something so disruptive they couldn't question it. I closed my eyes and let the genuine terror swelling in my chest take over. I dropped the heavy gold pen. It clattered harshly against the wood. I clutched my throat, gasping for air in loud, ragged breaths. The walls, they're closing in. I choked out, stumbling backward. My heavy leather chair scraped violently against the floor. I can't breathe. My claustrophobia. Martha stared at me, her face twisting instantly from fake maternal concern to raw, unfiltered annoyance. For heaven's sake, Sarah, now? Have a glass of water and sign the damn papers. But I didn't wait for her to finish. I pushed past her, stumbling through the heavy glass doors of the office, acting like a madwoman desperate for oxygen. The brutal Montana heat hit me the second I burst onto the sidewalk, but I didn't care. I scrambled toward my dusty, heavy-duty truck, yanking the door open and throwing myself inside. I slammed it shut, locking it instantly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I slumped forward, my chest heaving. It wasn't fake anymore. The panic was real. The walls of my entire life were actually closing in on me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I snatched it up, my fingers slipping on the glass. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Sarah, it's Elena." A hushed, frantic voice came through the speaker. "I only have a minute before your mother-in-law comes looking for me. Listen to me very carefully. Elena, what is going on?" I pleaded, hot tears finally breaking free and tracking through the dust on my cheeks. "Why did you tell me to run?" "I recognized you the second you walked in, Sarah," Elena whispered. "We were in the same foster home back in Billings when we were kids. You stood up for me back then. I couldn't sit there and watch them destroy you today." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to process this ghost from my past appearing at the exact moment my present was imploding. Destroy me? Liam said this trust is the only way to save the ranch from the state. There is no state lawsuit, Sarah, Elena interrupted, on her voice sharp with absolute certainty. I pulled the public records this morning when I saw the sheer size of your contract. The state isn't suing your LLC. The Land Management Bureau has absolutely no case against you. It is a complete fabrication. The world stopped spinning. It just stopped. What? The family trust Liam had me draft. It's a shell, Elena continued, her words hitting me like physical blows to the stomach. Martha is the trustee. Yes, but there's a hidden disbursement clause buried deep in the legal addendums. The second your signature validates the transfer of the water rights and that $2 million check, the trust immediately liquidates those assets. It funnels everything into an untouchable offshore account. My breath caught in my dry throat. An account? For who? Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second. The beneficiary is a woman named Chloe. Do you know a Chloe, Sarah? Chloe. The name echoed in the cramped, suffocating cab of my truck. Chloe. I didn't know anyone named Chloe, but the sickening, horrifying reality crashed down on me with the weight of a collapsing mountain. Liam didn't just want my money, he wanted to drain the very lifeblood of my ranch. In the West, whoever controls the water controls the land. He was taking the water rights that made our thousands of acres worth anything at all, taking the cash that kept our horses fed and handing it over to another woman. If you had signed those papers, Sarah, by noon today, you would be entirely bankrupt, Elena whispered, her voice filled with a deep, aching sympathy. You wouldn't own a single drop of water on your own land. And they were going to leave you with nothing but dead dirt and a hollow marriage. I lowered the phone slowly, my hand trembling against my denim jeans. I looked out the dusty windshield at the notary office. I could see Martha pacing furiously behind the glass windows, her face red with rage, shouting into her cell phone. She was probably calling Liam right now to tell him the stupid, low-class girl was having a panic attack and ruining their perfect $1 million heist. I thought back to last night. The way Liam had looked at me with those wide, desperate eyes. The way his hands shook when he handed me the fake court summons. He had held me in his arms, kissed my forehead, and told me he was doing this to protect us. It was an Oscar-worthy performance of love and panic. Every late night I spent delivering foals in the freezing cold. Oh, every dollar I scraped together while he bought himself custom cowboy boots. All of it was a joke to him, a massive, elaborate scheme to fatten me up for the slaughter. I sat there in the sweltering heat, the tears drying on my face. The sorrow was rapidly evaporating. What rushed in to take its place was dark, and it was devastatingly cold. I drove aimlessly, the heavy tires of my truck kicking up a massive trail of blinding dust on the empty, winding highway. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned a bruised, aching white. The pure, terrifying adrenaline from the notary office was finally fading, leaving behind a sickening, suffocating wave of absolute humiliation. How could I be so incredibly stupid? I kept whispering to the empty, quiet cab. How did I let this happen to me? I am a woman who breaks wild mustangs, who spends freezing, brutal nights in the barn pulling breech foals, who built a multi-million-dollar resort from nothing but dead dirt and relentless sweat. Yet I sat in that air-conditioned room and almost handed my entire life's work to a woman I didn't even know. People always judge the victim. They sit in their safe homes and say they would never be that blind, that they would have seen the glaring red flags. But they don't understand how the poison actually works. It isn't poured down your throat all at once. It is fed to you, drop by sweet, intoxicating drop, over years. Liam never forced me to do anything. He never had to. He was the dashing, charismatic face of the Heritage Ranch, the man with the perfect cowboy smile and the supposed noble Western bloodline. I was just the grit behind his glamour, and he made perfectly sure I never forgot my place. I remembered all those exhausting nights, dragging myself into the grand house covered in mud and horsehair, every single muscle in my body screaming in pure agony. He would be sitting comfortably by the roaring fire, pouring a glass of impossibly expensive bourbon. He would walk over, wrap his warm, strong arms around me, and kiss the top of my head. "You work way too hard, Sarah," he would murmur, his voice dripping with that manufactured perfect sympathy. "You're utterly exhausted. Let me handle all the heavy lifting with the bank. You just focus on what you're truly good at." The animals. It sounded like love. It felt like absolute protection. But it was a cage. Whenever a complex legal document arrived in the mail, or a crucial vendor contract needed reviewing, he would gently, lovingly pull the crisp papers out of my rough, calloused hands. "This legal jargon is just a massive headache, darling." "You don't need to stress your pretty head over it," he would say with that devastatingly charming smile. "My mother and I, we speak this corporate language. It's in our blood to handle the legacy. Let the ranch aristocracy handle the boring paperwork. You just keep the horses happy." It was a joke. A running, affectionate joke in our marriage. But beneath the warm laughter, he was systematically, ruthlessly stripping away my power. He was quietly cutting my access to our own finances, subtly alienating me from every major business decision, isolating me until my entire universe shrank down to just the stables and the dusty pastures. And Martha played her part flawlessly. She would look at my dirty boots on her pristine porch and sigh, a soft, condescending sound that made me feel entirely worthless. She would talk endlessly about the grand, historic heritage of their family name, heavily implying that I was just the hired help lucky enough to share her son's bed. They built a thick glass wall around me. Inside the wall, I was their beloved, hard-working girl. Outside the wall, where the real power and the real money lay, I was an uneducated peasant, not fit to read a simple ledger. They gaslighted me so deeply into believing that my ignorance was a privilege, that trusting them blindly was the ultimate proof of being a good, loyal wife. I slammed my foot on the brakes. The heavy truck skidded to a jarring halt on the rocky shoulder of the deserted dirt road. A thick cloud of brown dust washed over the windshield, completely obscuring the bright midday sun. I stared into the swirling dirt, my chest heaving, gasping for air. The tears finally stopped. The profound, agonizing loneliness I felt just 20 minutes ago was rapidly evaporating. I wasn't naive. I was conditioned. I was broken down day by day, compliment by compliment, until I voluntarily handed over the keys to my own kingdom. Liam's sweet words weren't a shield. They were a blindfold, and I had worn it so willingly. I turned off the rumbling engine. The sudden silence of the plains was deafening. I looked down at my hands, rough, scarred from years of brutal, unforgiving labor. These hands built the Heritage Ranch. Not Liam's expensive tailored suits, not Martha's pathetic aristocratic delusions. Me. I built it. And they honestly thought they could just smile, pat my head like a dog, and take it all to fund some secret twisted life with a woman named Chloe. A bitter, ice-cold laugh escaped my throat. I had been a submissive, trusting fool for 5 long years. I had let them treat me like a prized draft horse, useful for pulling all the heavy weight, but ultimately expendable. But they forgot one crucial thing about me. You can tame a wild horse, but you can never, ever beat the wild completely out of her. I drove until the paved highway turned into gravel, and the gravel turned into dirt. The sun was dipping below the jagged mountain peaks by the time I pulled up to the heavy iron gates of my uncle's wildlife rescue sanctuary. My Uncle Ray, a gruff, retired park ranger with a heart as vast as the Montana sky, took one look at my pale, tear-streaked face and pulled me into a tight embrace. The familiar smell of wood smoke and pine on his flannel jacket finally broke the last of my defenses. I sat at his worn kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, and poured out the entire horrifying truth. The fake lawsuit, the trust trap, the mysterious woman named Chloe. I told him everything. Ray's weathered face turned a dangerous shade of red. He slammed his heavy fist down on the table, making the coffee spill over the rim. Those absolute parasites, he roared, his voice shaking the cabin walls. What kind of monsters do that to their own family? Sarah, you are not going back to that toxic wasteland. You stay right here. Tomorrow morning, we drive into town. You hire the most vicious divorce lawyer we can find, and you walk away clean. You let the courts tear Liam and Martha apart from a distance. You're young. You can start over somewhere else. I stared down at the dark, bitter liquid in my mug. His words made so much sense. It would be so incredibly easy to just lock the door to this safe little cabin, hide under a heavy blanket, and cry until the pain washed away. Most people would choose exactly that path, to run, to seek safety, to let the lawyers fight a cold clinical battle while trying to heal a broken heart. I pushed the chair back and walked out onto the back porch. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin shirt. Just a few yards away in the large rehabilitation enclosures, the rescued wolves were pacing back and forth. And I walked slowly up to the thick chain-link fence. A massive timber wolf, recovering from a brutal trap wound on its hind leg, stopped pacing and locked its piercing golden eyes on me. It was injured. It was bleeding. But there was absolutely no fear in its stare. It wasn't hiding. It was calculating. If I was a weak woman, I would have stayed hidden in my uncle's cabin. But looking into the eyes of that wounded predator, a terrifying realization washed over me. If I ran away right now, what exactly would I lose? I would lose the stables I designed with my own 2 hands. I would lose the acres of pasture I fought tooth and nail to fertilize and expand. I would lose 10 years of my youth, my sweat, my absolute devotion, and I would become a pathetic, defeated victim that they chewed up and spit out into the dirt. No. When in the brutal world of ruthless people, the retreat of a good person is the ultimate reward for the wicked. If I walked away, Liam and Martha would pop champagne in the living room I decorated. They would hand my life's work over to Chloe without shedding a single drop of blood. I realized something under that cold, starry sky. Forgiveness doesn't make your enemies respect you. Running away certainly doesn't make them fear you. The only thing that truly makes a predator tremble is when you take their own twisted rules and use them to tighten a noose around their necks. I wiped the last tear from my cheek. The crushing sorrow was completely gone, replaced by a dark, consuming fire. I had to go back to the mansion. I had to walk right back into the lion's den. I would have to swallow my disgust, eat dinner at their table, and smile at my mother-in-law while she hurled her subtle insults. I would have to watch Liam pretend to be a loving husband while he plotted to ruin me. I wasn't going back because I was clinging to the past. I was going back to build a guillotine. If they wanted to play a game of deception and greed, I was going to let their greed inflate until it violently exploded. I turned away from the wolf enclosure and walked back into the warm cabin. I looked at my uncle, my voice steady and cold. "I'm going back tomorrow, Ray. You can't be serious," he pleaded, grabbing my arm. "They will destroy you." I met his worried gaze, feeling an unnatural, terrifying calm settle over my entire body. "They already tried," I whispered. "But now, it's my turn to hunt." The drive back to the ranch felt like a slow, suffocating death march. I parked my dusty, beat-up truck next to Liam's polished silver pickup in the gravel courtyard. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I took one last deep breath, locking my raging fire into a dark, heavy box inside my chest, and stepped out. I had to be the broken, overworked wife. I had to be exactly the naive fool they expected me to be. Liam was already waiting on the sweeping wraparound porch. His jaw was locked tight. I could tell he was absolutely furious, but the second he saw my red, tear-stained face, he instantly smoothed his features into that sickeningly perfect, concerned cowboy smile. "Sarah, where on earth have you been? You terrified us." I stumbled up the wooden steps and collapsed against his chest, forcing my shoulders to shake. "I'm so sorry, Liam," I sobbed, burying my dry eyes against his expensive flannel shirt. The walls just started closing in at the office. I couldn't breathe. The stress of the state lawsuit, the sleepless nights pulling foals in the barn. My mind just completely snapped. I drove out to the old creek to try and calm down. "Please, please don't be mad at me." He stroked my hair, but his touch felt like spiders crawling across my skin. "Shh, it's all right, sweetheart," he murmured, though I could hear the cold, hard calculation vibrating in his chest. "We rescheduled the notary for next week. You just need to rest. In fact, I have a surprise for you." Right on cue, the crunch of heavy tires on gravel echoed through the quiet valley. A sleek, black luxury SUV glided up our driveway, looking completely alien against the rugged, wild Montana backdrop. "And I realized you have way too much on your plate, Sarah," Liam said, his grip tightening slightly on my shoulder. "So I hired some high-level help for the corporate side, a new public relations and branding consultant. She's going to live here in the mansion with us for a few months to completely revamp the ranch's image." The passenger door opened. A woman stepped out. She didn't belong on a working ranch. She wore a pristine white silk maternity dress, a wide-brimmed designer hat, and spotless beige suede boots that had clearly never touched a single ounce of real dirt. But it wasn't her ridiculous clothes that made the blood freeze solid in my veins. It was the undeniable, prominent swell of her pregnant belly. Chloe, I thought, the name echoing like a gunshot in my mind. Liam stepped forward, eagerly offering his hand to help her up the wooden steps as if she were made of fragile, priceless glass. "Sarah, meet Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with a soft, genuine adoration he hadn't shown me in years. Chloe stopped on the porch and looked me up and down, her eyes dragged over my faded, dirt-stained jeans, my calloused hands, the sweat drying on my forehead. A slow, mocking smirk spread across her perfectly painted lips. "Oh, wow," she practically purred, her voice dripping with venom. "You must be Sarah. Liam told me you were the backbone of the manual labor out here. It's so incredibly brave of you to just let yourself go like that for the sake of the animals." My jaw locked so hard my teeth ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag her by that expensive hair right off my property. But I forced my head down, playing the submissive, exhausted fool. "It's nice to meet you," I whispered, making my voice sound small and broken. She walked right past me, the overpowering scent of heavy, sweet perfume completely drowning out the fresh pine air of my home. She paused at the heavy oak front doors, running a manicured hand over her swollen belly. "Liam, darling." The drive from the airport was just exhausting for the baby, she sighed dramatically, not even bothering to look back at me. "Sarah, be a dear and grab my heavy suitcases from the trunk, would you? Oh, and I take my water with lemon ice cold. Bring it up to the master guest suite." I froze. I looked at Liam, waiting for him to defend me, to tell this stranger that I was his wife, the co-founder of this empire, not the hired help. But Liam didn't even flinch. He just looked at me with that calm, commanding stare. "You heard her, honey. Let's make our guest comfortable." I stood there on the porch of the house I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. I watched my husband place a protective, loving hand on his mistress's lower back, guiding her into my sanctuary. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it burned like pure acid in my throat. They were parading their betrayal right in front of my face, humiliating me on my own land. I walked slowly over to the SUV. I grabbed the heavy leather bags, the straps cutting deep into my calloused palms. Every single step up those wooden stairs felt like walking on broken glass. But I kept my head down. I kept my breathing steady, natural, calm. "Enjoy your ice water, Chloe," I thought, staring at their retreating backs through the open door. Enjoy my beautiful house. Enjoy the illusion of your grand Western empire, because I am going to burn it to the ground with you inside it. The smell of fresh lemon and expensive Earl Grey tea wafted from the grand living room. It was a stark, sickening contrast to the smell of dust and horse sweat clinging to my heavy denim clothes. I stood quietly in the shadowed hallway, holding a silver tray with their iced water, just watching them. Martha, the self-proclaimed matriarch of the Heritage Ranch, was sitting on the plush leather sofa right next to Chloe. Martha's usually rigid, cold face was completely transformed. She was smiling, a wide, genuine, almost desperate smile that I had not seen directed at me in 5 long, grueling years. Martha carefully peeled a green apple, or slicing it into perfectly thin pieces, before handing them to Chloe on a delicate porcelain plate. "You need your strength, my dear," Martha cooed, her hand reaching out to gently, reverently stroke the prominent swell of Chloe's stomach. "The entire future of this family is resting right there in your womb. We have to make sure you are absolutely glowing." Chloe took a slice of apple, her perfectly manicured nails flashing in the warm afternoon light. "Oh, you spoil me too much, Martha," she sighed, leaning back heavily into the velvet cushions. "It's just so incredibly exhausting carrying the next heir. I honestly don't know how some people do heavy lifting in this condition." Martha let out a sharp, derisive scoff. "Well, some women are built for manual labor, like mules, and some women are built to carry on a noble legacy." And she turned her head, her sharp, judgmental eyes locking onto me standing in the doorway. "There you are, Sarah. Good Lord, don't just stand there dripping filthy dirt onto my Persian rug. Bring the water and go back out to the barns. The smell is frankly ruining our afternoon tea." I walked forward, my heavy boots silent on the thick rug, and carefully set the silver tray on the mahogany table. I didn't say a single word. I didn't snap back. I just looked down at Martha's deeply wrinkled, incredibly proud face. A few days ago, that casual insult would have sent me running to the bathroom to cry. It would have completely crushed my spirit. But today, standing there looking at her fawning over my husband's pregnant mistress, I didn't feel hurt. I felt a sudden, piercing clarity. Need people watch a mother-in-law destroy her son's marriage, and they just automatically assume it's pure, unfiltered greed. But looking deeply into Martha's cold eyes, I saw something far more pathetic. I saw a woman who had never actually possessed a single ounce of real power in her entire life. Decades ago, she was just a young bride brought onto this sprawling, male-dominated ranch. She was judged solely by her ability to produce a strong male heir to carry on the sacred Western bloodline. She lived her whole life under the crushing, suffocating weight of a patriarchal system that valued her womb infinitely more than her mind or her character. She spent 40 years standing in the dark shadow of a dominating husband, constantly told that her only real worth was the son she could raise to take his place. And instead of fighting that toxic prejudice, she absorbed it. She let it become her entire identity. This is what they call the patriarchal bargain. Women who are deeply oppressed by a ruthless system, voluntarily becoming the fiercest, most vicious enforcers of that very same system, just to scrape up a handful of fake borrowed power. By crushing me, a woman who actually worked the land and built the real wealth, and by worshiping Chloe, a pliant vessel carrying her precious grandson, Martha was desperately trying to buy a crown she never got to wear. She genuinely thought she was the undisputed queen of this empire, but she was just a tragic, willing tool for her son's cruelty. She was passionately destroying another woman just to feel relevant in a world that never truly respected her. It was a breathtaking, a horrifying tragedy of women destroying women. But the absolute, bitter irony of it all almost made me smile. Martha was eagerly selling her soul, trading away a fiercely loyal daughter-in-law who would have cared for her until her dying day, all for a ruthless mercenary in a white silk maternity dress. Martha thought Chloe was her ultimate prize, her obedient little incubator. She had absolutely no idea that Chloe didn't give a damn about the noble bloodline, the heritage, or the ranch. Chloe was a parasite drawn strictly to the smell of a $2 million check. I stepped back from the table, my face a perfect blank mask of submission. "I'll get back to the barns, Martha," I said quietly, my voice utterly calm. "Enjoy your tea." I turned and walked away, leaving them in their golden, sunlit bubble of total delusion. Oh, let her stroke that belly. Let her hurl her insults at me. Let her build her entire pathetic fantasy on the delicate shoulders of a greedy mistress. The higher Martha built her illusory empire, the more devastating the fall would be. She was cheerfully writing her own death warrant, completely blind to the fact that the woman she was serving apples to would be the very first person to bleed her dry and kick her to the curb when the money vanished. And I was going to make absolutely sure that the money vanished. I knew a regular digital recorder or a cheap nanny cam would never work. Liam was incredibly paranoid. He was constantly monitoring our home network, checking the Wi-Fi logs for any unfamiliar devices. He thought he was a mastermind, but he was just a city boy playing a wealthy cowboy, wherein he knew absolutely nothing about the actual rugged equipment it took to run a wild Montana ranch. So I bypassed the electronics store and walked straight into the old tack room. I dug into my heavy gear chest and pulled out a professional motion-activated trail camera. It was the exact kind we used to track mountain lions and wolves in the deep, freezing woods. It ran on independent, long-lasting battery packs. It recorded in crystal-clear infrared. And most importantly, it was completely invisible in the pitch-black darkness. That night, while Liam was busy in the main house pouring impossibly expensive wine for Chloe and his mother, I slipped quietly out the back door. The cold air bit my face as I hurried across the gravel driveway to his private log cabin office. The heavy wooden door clicked open, and the air inside smelled deeply of his custom cologne and stale, expensive cigar smoke, a scent that used to make me feel warm and protected, but now just made my stomach violently churn. I climbed onto the back of his plush leather sofa, reaching high up into the dark, exposed wooden rafters. I mounted the trail cam securely, angling the hidden lens to point directly down at his massive mahogany desk and the leather visitor chairs. I set the sensor to capture both audio and motion, concealed the strap with a piece of old frayed burlap, and slipped back out into the freezing night. I had to endure 3 agonizing, suffocating days of waiting. 3 days of serving them roasted dinners, scrubbing their dirty dishes, and watching Martha smile brightly at the woman who was systematically stealing my entire life. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, Liam drove Martha and Chloe into the city for a lavish, high-end baby shopping spree. The second their luxury SUV disappeared down the winding dirt road, I sprinted across the yard to the cabin. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely pry the camera down from the rafters. I ripped the tiny SD card out, shoved the camera back into my jacket, and ran straight to the deepest, darkest corner of the breeding barn. I locked the heavy sliding doors, sat on a bale of hay, and pushed the card into my laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked on the first large video file. The screen flickered to life in eerie black and white infrared. There was Liam sitting casually behind his desk. A moment later, Martha walked in, shutting the door tightly behind her. The hidden microphone picked up their voices with terrifying, perfect clarity. They were laughing, actually laughing about how incredibly stupid I looked carrying Chloe's heavy leather bags up the stairs. But then, the amusement faded from Liam's face, and the conversation shifted, and what I heard next completely shattered whatever was left of my human soul. "We need more liquid cash before the Heritage Gala, Liam," Martha hissed, leaning aggressively over the desk. "Chloe's demands are getting highly expensive, and the offshore trust account takes way too long to process a clean withdrawal." "What about the livestock out there?" Liam sighed, tapping his silver pen against the wood. "The regular grazing herd won't fetch much fast, but Sarah's championship bloodline, those 5 thoroughbreds, they are worth an absolute fortune. But we can't sell them at a public auction, Mom." Sarah tracks the registry. She would find out immediately. Martha's eyes glowed like a heartless demon in the infrared light. "Then don't sell them at a public auction. Call that kill buyer from across the Canadian border. He pays in pure, untraceable cash, and he drives his heavy trailers in the dead of night. No questions asked. Once those horses are gone, they are gone." Liam didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "I'll make the call tomorrow morning." I slammed the laptop shut. I fell hard to my knees on the dirty, straw-covered floor, gasping for air as if someone had physically crushed my windpipe. The money, the land, the cruel, humiliating betrayal of our marriage. All of that was devastating. But this was an entirely different universe of pure, unadulterated evil. There are certain pains in this world that go far beyond financial ruin or a broken heart. It is a profound, soul-crushing agony when you realize the people you once loved are willing to sacrifice innocent, breathing lives on the altar of their own ugly greed. Those 5 horses weren't just corporate assets to me. I had delivered them with my own 2 hands. I had slept on the freezing barn floor when they were sick. I knew the rhythm of their breathing, their gentle personalities, their beautiful souls. They were my family, and my husband and my mother-in-law were casually, coldly plotting to send them to a brutal, terrifying slaughterhouse just to get some quick cash to fund a mistress's shopping spree. The tears I cried in that dark barn weren't tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of absolute, murderous rage. Liam and Martha thought they were playing a clever, sophisticated game of corporate chess, but by targeting my innocent animals, they had just crossed a sacred boundary that could never, ever be uncrossed. I wiped my face roughly, the dirt and tears smearing across my cheeks. I took the tiny SD card from the computer and held it tightly against my chest. They wanted to act like ruthless, heartless predators in my territory. I was going to show them exactly what a real slaughter looked like. I sat in the dim, dusty light of the breeding barn, staring blindly at the frozen frame of my husband on the laptop screen. Any normal person would have thrown the computer violently against the wooden wall. Any normal wife would have stormed straight up to the main house, kicking the door open, screaming until her vocal cords bled. I demanding answers, breaking every single piece of fine china in that pristine dining room. But I didn't make a sound. I didn't shed a single solitary tear. My hands, which had been shaking uncontrollably just moments before, were suddenly completely steady. I clicked the mouse, dragging the horrifying video files onto a secure, encrypted flash drive. I pulled the tiny SD card from the slot, tucked it safely into the hidden lining of my heavy barn jacket, and quietly closed the laptop. I walked out of the barn and into the fading afternoon light. The Montana breeze was biting, sweeping down from the snow-capped peaks, but I couldn't feel the cold. I couldn't feel anything at all. People watch stories like this and they shudder. They wonder how a woman can be so terrifyingly cold. They think a wife who doesn't weep over her husband's brutal betrayal must be just as heartless as he is. But they don't understand the absolute limits of the human brain. When you are betrayed by the people you trusted most in this world, when the solid ground beneath your feet is ripped away so violently that you are left in a terrifying freefall, your mind doesn't just process the pain, it short circuits. It is a very real, biological phenomenon called betrayal trauma. My amygdala, the primitive part of my brain responsible for processing fear and agonizing sorrow, was completely, catastrophically overloaded by the sheer sickening scale of their cruelty. To stop my entire nervous system from suffering a total collapse, my brain simply flipped the main breaker. It triggered an emotional numbing so profound, it completely severed my conscious connection to the grief. I wasn't cold because I had suddenly stopped loving my life or my horses. I was cold because my body had forcefully transformed me into a pure, calculating machine, just to keep my lungs breathing through the darkest crisis of my existence. I walked up the porch steps and opened the heavy front door. The house smelled of expensive floral perfume and roasted garlic. I walked straight into the grand kitchen, tied my faded canvas apron around my waist, and began chopping vegetables for their dinner. The heavy steel knife hit the wooden cutting board in a steady, rhythmic thud. An hour later, I set a perfectly roasted chicken on the sprawling mahogany dining table. Liam, Martha, and Chloe were already seated, laughing lightly over crystal glasses of imported sparkling water. Liam looked up at me, his eyes gleaming with that practiced, sickeningly perfect warmth. "This smells absolutely incredible, Sarah," he said, smoothly slicing into the meat. "You really outdid yourself tonight." I looked at the man who had just calmly ordered the slaughter of my innocent horses. I looked at the mother-in-law who was eager to fund that bloody nightmare. And I looked at the pregnant mistress who was sitting comfortably at my table, entirely confident that this grand empire was already hers. A slow, gentle smile spread across my face. I poured him another glass of water. "Eat up, Liam," I murmured, keeping my voice soft, steady, and perfectly subservient. "You all need your energy for the big Heritage Gala tomorrow night." Martha smirked, delicately dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "For once, you are absolutely right, Sarah." Oh, she sneered, her voice dripping with pure condescension. "Tomorrow night is the most critical event in the history of this ranch. All the elite, old-money families in the state will be there. We need to present a flawless, unified front. You will stay entirely out of sight, of course, down by the stables. We simply cannot have you embarrassing us in front of the wealthy investors with your lack of refinement." I didn't flinch. I just kept smiling, nodding obediently as I quietly cleared their dirty salad plates. "Yes, Martha, I understand completely. I'll make sure everything is absolutely flawless." I walked back into the kitchen and stood alone by the deep porcelain sink, listening to their muffled, arrogant laughter echoing from the dining room. They genuinely thought they had broken the wild horse. They thought I was finally fully tamed, happily carrying their heavy burdens while they prepared to ride off into the sunset with my money. They had absolutely no idea that the total silence in the house wasn't the sound of my submission. It was the terrifying, heavy silence that falls right before a massive tornado touches down. The sun dipped below the jagged mountain line, casting long, dramatic shadows across the sprawling grounds of the Heritage Ranch. The night of the 40th anniversary gala had finally arrived. The massive rustic barn had been completely transformed into a breathtaking ballroom. Thousands of fairy lights draped from the heavy wooden rafters, glowing warmly over the long tables, set with crisp white linen and fine crystal. The air hummed with the smooth sounds of a live jazz band and the clinking of champagne flutes. Every wealthy investor, or every local politician, every old money family in the entire state of Montana was walking up the red carpet that had been rolled out over the gravel. And where was I? Liam found me in our bedroom just 2 hours before the first guests arrived. He didn't bring me a beautiful evening gown. He didn't hand me a jewelry box. He tossed a bundle of heavy, coarse fabric onto the bed. It was the thick, faded canvas uniform I usually wore for mucking out the deepest, filthiest winter stalls, ripped at the knees and stained permanently with mud and grease. "Put this on, Sarah," Liam ordered, his voice cold and completely devoid of emotion. I stared at the pile of dirty clothes, my hands trembling slightly. "Liam, it's our anniversary gala. The investors will expect to see me." He let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Don't flatter yourself, Sarah. They expect to see the face of the Heritage Ranch. They expect elegance." He adjusted the cuffs of his immaculately tailored tuxedo, not even bothering to look at me. "Chloe is acting as the primary hostess tonight. She has the right polish to handle these people. You are going to stay out back by the stables and make sure the caterers don't screw up the service entrance. Do not come near the main tent. I will not have you embarrassing my mother and me in front of the entire county looking like a tired, washed-up stable hand." He wanted to break me. He wanted to push my face into the dirt and force me to watch another woman shine in the spotlight that I had built for him. It wasn't enough to steal my money or my water rights. He had to utterly destroy my dignity before he threw me away. I slowly picked up the rough canvas shirt, while the smell of stale hay hit my nose. I kept my head bowed, hiding the dangerous, burning light in my eyes. "Of course, Liam," I whispered, my voice sounding perfectly defeated. "I'll stay out of your way. I'll make sure everything runs smoothly in the dark." I changed into the torn uniform. I pulled my hair back into a messy, severe knot, and I walked out the back door of the mansion. I stood in the shadows of the stables, leaning against the cold wooden fence. The contrast was absolutely sickening. Just 50 yards away, inside the glowing tent, Chloe was gliding across the dance floor. She wore a stunning emerald green silk evening gown that clung perfectly to her pregnant belly. She laughed loudly, throwing her head back, accepting the warm handshakes and congratulations of the wealthy guests. Martha was right beside her, beaming proudly, introducing her to everyone as their brilliant, indispensable new consultant. Liam stood nearby holding a glass of expensive bourbon, soaking in the absolute admiration of his peers. I watched them bask in the blinding, artificial light of their fake empire. My hands gripped the rough wood of the fence so tightly that splinters dug deep into my palms. I could feel the cold, heavy shape of the tiny remote control tucked safely inside the pocket of my dirty coveralls. Liam thought he was a genius. He thought by hiding me away in the dirt and the shadows, he had permanently silenced me. He didn't realize that the darkness is exactly where the predator waits. You can dress a wolf in silk and you can dress a queen in rags. But when the cage finally opens, the truth always violently tears its way out. I watched the jazz band finish their set. I saw the MC step up to the grand podium, tapping the microphone to get the crowd's attention. The booming voice echoed across the valley. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the main event. Please welcome the man who carries the legacy of the Heritage Ranch. Liam!" The crowd erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Liam handed his glass to a waiter, adjusted his tie, and began walking toward the brightly lit stage. He was smiling. He was so incredibly, foolishly happy. I took my hand off the fence. I pulled the remote control from my pocket, my thumb resting lightly on the single, smooth button. I stepped out of the shadows of the stables and began walking slowly, deliberately, straight toward the blinding lights of the main tent. The time for hiding was over. The time for the slaughter. We had just begun. I stood completely still just outside the massive canvas tent, hidden in the cool Montana shadows. The bright lights inside cast golden silhouettes on the fabric. I could hear Liam's voice, smooth and perfectly modulated, echoing through the high-end PA system. For 40 years, this ranch has stood as a beacon of true Western heritage, he said, his words drawing a respectful silence from the wealthy crowd. My mother, Martha, has been the unshakable foundation of our family, and recently we've been blessed with the guidance of a remarkable woman, our new lead consultant, Chloe. Her vision is helping us usher the Heritage Ranch into a bright, secure future. A future that will soon include a new generation to carry our name. A collective, warm murmur rippled through the guests. I could picture Chloe blushing, resting her hand on her pregnant belly while Martha beamed with that arrogant, aristocratic pride. It was a perfect, nauseatingly beautiful portrait of a successful dynasty. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air. I stepped out of the darkness and walked straight down the center aisle of the tent. The heavy thud of my muddy boots on the wooden floorboards cut through the polite applause. Heads began to turn. Conversations died instantly. I walked past the tables adorned with crystal centerpieces, wearing my torn, grease-stained coveralls. The contrast was absolutely jarring. I could see the shock washing over the faces of the investors and local politicians. Liam's perfect smile froze. His eyes locked onto me, wide with sudden, terrifying panic. "What are you doing?" he hissed into the microphone, forgetting it was still on. "Security! Get her out of here!" But the two burly security guards at the back of the tent didn't move. My Uncle Ray, wearing his old, faded ranger jacket, was standing right beside them, his arms crossed over his chest, blocking the exit. I didn't stop until I reached the steps of the stage. I walked up, my boots tracking dark, wet mud across the pristine red carpet. I stepped right up to Liam and ripped the heavy microphone out of his trembling hand. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice didn't shake. It rang out through the massive speakers, sharp and clear as breaking glass. "I am Sarah, co-founder of the Heritage Ranch and Liam's wife. My husband speaks so beautifully about legacy and the future, but I think it's time you all saw exactly how this family builds its empire." And I raised the small plastic remote in my left hand and pressed the button. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of beautiful historic ranch photos, suddenly flickered. The screen went black for a split second. Then it flared to life with the stark, grainy black and white infrared footage from the hidden trail camera. The audio boomed through the tent, echoing over the stunned crowd. "We need more liquid cash before the Heritage Gala." Martha's harsh, hissing voice filled the room. The footage clearly showed her leaning aggressively over Liam's desk in the dark cabin. "What about the livestock out there?" Then Liam's face filled the giant screen. "The regular grazing herd won't fetch much fast, but Sarah's championship bloodline. Those 5 thoroughbreds. They are worth an absolute fortune." And a sharp collective gasp swept through the wealthy crowd. These were horse people. They knew exactly what those thoroughbreds meant to me and to the ranch. Martha's voice echoed again, vicious and cold. "Call that kill buyer from across the Canadian border. He pays in pure, untraceable cash. Once those horses are gone, they are gone." Liam's face on the screen nodded slowly. "I'll make the call tomorrow morning." The silence in the tent was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating, dead silence. Every single eye in that massive room stared at the screen, then shifted slowly to the people standing on the stage. Martha's face was the color of dirty chalk. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Chloe shrank away from Liam, desperately trying to hide behind the podium, and on her hands shaking violently. Liam stood frozen, his perfect tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The sweat was pouring down his face, completely ruining his charming cowboy facade. I stood there, surrounded by the absolute destruction of their meticulously crafted reputations. I looked out at the disgusted faces of the investors, the men and women who had just been clapping for this so-called noble family. The catharsis was a physical sensation, a rushing, brilliant wave of pure, unadulterated justice washing away 5 years of quiet humiliation. They had tried to bury me in the dirt, but they had forgotten that dirt is exactly where a wildfire starts. The silence in the tent was broken only by the sound of Martha's ragged, struggling breaths. Liam was staring at the massive LED screen as if it were a ghost, on his mouth hanging slightly open, his pristine tuxedo jacket clinging to his sweat-drenched shoulders. The total, utter destruction of his aristocratic reputation was almost complete. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't going to let them simply walk away with their pride in shreds. I was going to burn the very foundation they stood on. I turned slowly to look at Chloe. She was backed up against the edge of the stage, her hands gripping her pregnant belly, her eyes wide with pure animal terror. She saw her $2 million payday evaporating into thin air, but there was something else in her expression, something far more desperate than just a gold digger losing a prize. She turned and grabbed the skirt of her heavy silk gown, preparing to jump off the side of the stage and disappear into the night. But as she reached the bottom step, two men in sharp, impeccably tailored black suits stepped out from the shadows of the crowd. They didn't look like investors. They didn't look like local politicians. They had the cold, dead-eyed stare of men who collected debts for a living. They stood shoulder to shoulder, completely blocking her path. Chloe let out a sharp, pathetic gasp and stumbled backward, colliding hard with Liam. I raised the microphone again. My voice was eerily calm, cutting through the thick, tense air of the ballroom. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, Liam," I said, watching him flinch at the sound of his own name. "You thought you were bringing a brilliant corporate strategist into our home to secure our legacy. You thought you were the predator and I was just the dumb, blind prey. But the truth is, you were just an easy mark for someone far more desperate than you." I clicked the small remote one last time. The screen flashed, replacing the infrared video with a barrage of high-resolution documents. They weren't from the ranch. They were financial statements, court judgments, and aggressive collection notices, all bearing the official seal of the state of Nevada. The name at the top of every single document was highlighted in bright, glaring red: Chloe Anderson. I looked out at the stunned, completely silent crowd. "Our new lead consultant," I announced, my voice echoing off the canvas walls, "isn't a PR genius. She's a desperate gambler who owes over $2.5 million to several prominent casino syndicates in Las Vegas. She didn't come to Montana for love or for our noble family legacy. She came because Liam is a weak, gullible man who was willing to hand her $2 million in pure cash to pay off her debts." Liam whipped his head around to stare at Chloe. His face was a mask of absolute horrified confusion. "Chloe, What is she talking about?" he stammered, his voice cracking. Chloe didn't answer him. She was staring in sheer, unadulterated terror at the two men in the black suits standing at the edge of the stage. They took a slow, deliberate step forward, pulling back their jackets just enough to reveal the heavy holsters strapped to their chests. "The truth is, Liam," I continued, ignoring his pathetic confusion, "I knew about the offshore trust account the minute I left the notary office, so I had my lawyer file an emergency asset freeze at 8 o'clock yesterday morning. The $2 million never transferred. The water rights are locked up in litigation. You have absolutely no money to give her," Chloe screamed. It wasn't a delicate, theatrical cry. It was the raw, guttural scream of a woman who knew her life was completely, utterly over. She shoved Liam aside so violently he nearly fell, and she tried to sprint toward the back exit of the tent. But she didn't make it 5 steps. The two men moved with terrifying speed, grabbing her by the arms and dragging her roughly backward. "Let go of me!" Chloe shrieked, kicking wildly in her expensive heels. "Liam! Liam, do something!" But Liam just stood there, completely paralyzed, staring at the woman he had destroyed his entire marriage for. The illusion was shattered. He wasn't the brilliant master of the Heritage Ranch. He was just a pathetic, broke fool who had been played by a desperate gambler, and he had brought the Las Vegas underworld right to his own front door. I stood in my dirty, torn coveralls, watching the absolute chaos unfold. The wealthy investors were scrambling toward the exits, knocking over chairs and shattering crystal glasses in their desperation to escape the scene. Martha was slumped in her chair, her face contorted in agony, clutching her chest as a genuine, massive stroke finally took hold of her. It is a terrifying, beautiful insight into the human condition. Greedy people always believe they are the apex predators in the room. They are so consumed by their own arrogant hunger that they never, ever realize when they have walked directly into a much larger, much deadlier trap. They thought they could use me as a tool, milk me for everything I was worth, and toss me aside. But karma is swift, and karma is merciless. When you treat people like disposable trash, the universe has a very precise way of throwing you directly into the garbage. The wail of the police sirens cut through the crisp mountain air, growing louder and more frantic with every passing second. Inside the tent, the chaos was absolute. Wealthy investors were pushing past each other, desperately trying to get out before the flashing red and blue lights illuminated their faces. I stood perfectly still on the stage, watching the total spectacular collapse of the Heritage Ranch aristocracy. A team of local deputies swarmed into the ballroom, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. They didn't even look twice at the panicked guests. They marched straight for Liam. My lawyer had already handed the local precinct the complete, undeniable file of his financial fraud. Liam didn't fight back. He just let them pull his arms behind his back, the heavy steel handcuffs clicking shut over the cuffs of his expensive tuxedo. His eyes were completely hollow, staring blankly at the muddy floorboards as they read him his rights and marched him out into the cold night. Over by the VIP tables, a circle of paramedics was frantically working on Martha, the shock of having her entire fake empire ripped away in front of her. High society peers had been too much for her fragile, arrogant heart. They lifted her onto a gurney, strapping an oxygen mask over her face. She was completely paralyzed on her left side, her eyes rolling wildly in pure, helpless panic. The woman who had spent 40 years looking down on everyone else was now completely at the mercy of strangers, unable to even speak a single word of command. And then there was Chloe. The two men in the sharp black suits hadn't let her go. She was thrashing against their grip, her beautiful green silk dress torn and covered in dust, her expensive makeup smeared across her terrified face. She looked up and saw Liam being shoved into the back of a police cruiser. "Liam! You coward!" she screamed, her voice cracking in pure, desperate fury. "You promised me the money. You promised you'd take care of me." But Liam didn't even turn his head. He just sank down into the dark back seat, disappearing completely from her life. The two debt collectors tightened their grip on Chloe's arms. She started sobbing uncontrollably, begging them, pleading for just a little more time. But they just pulled her roughly toward the exit, dragging her out into the shadows to face the brutal, terrifying reality of the Las Vegas underworld she thought she could escape. The tent slowly cleared out until the only sounds left were the crickets outside and the soft hum of the massive LED screen still glowing behind me. I looked around at the overturned chairs, the shattered crystal, the ruined, muddy red carpet. This had been their absolute dream, their perfect gilded fantasy. There is an old, undeniable law of the universe that people like Liam and Martha always seem to forget. When you build your entire life on a foundation of using other people, when you view human beings as nothing more than disposable tools to feed your own endless greed, you are writing a contract with karma, and karma always, eventually, collects the debt. And they thought they were building a dynasty, but all they really did was dig their own graves deeper and darker than they could ever imagine until they inevitably fell right in. I stepped down from the stage, the heavy canvas uniform suddenly feeling incredibly light. The air in the tent was finally clear. The poison had been completely drawn out. I walked out the back entrance, leaving the flashing police lights behind me, and headed toward the quiet, familiar darkness of my stables. A full year has passed since that night. The morning air sweeping down from the Montana peaks is sharp, clean, and completely free of the heavy, suffocating weight that used to choke this valley. I am sitting high in the saddle of my lead thoroughbred champion, one of the very horses they tried to send to the slaughterhouse in the dead of night. When as we gallop across the vast open prairie, the thundering rhythm of his hooves against the dirt is the most beautiful sound in the world. I look out over the miles of green pastures, the winding creeks, and the heavy timber fences. It all belongs to me. Every single drop of water, every blade of grass. I guide my horse toward the edge of the county line, where the dirt trail meets the old, cracked asphalt of the highway. There is a rundown, rusted gas station sitting alone in the dust. As we slow to a gentle walk, I see a man wearing a stained, grease-covered mechanic's uniform, pushing a heavy push broom across the oil-slicked concrete. His shoulders are slumped, his back deeply hunched under the crushing weight of a ruined life. He stops sweeping and looks up at the sound of the approaching hooves. It is Liam, the dashing, arrogant prince of the Western aristocracy is completely gone. His face is deeply lined, hollowed out by endless legal battles, staggering debt, and the absolute humiliation of becoming the laughingstock of the entire state. He sees me sitting tall in the saddle, bathed in the warm, golden light of the early sunrise. For a long, silent moment, our eyes meet across the dusty highway. I can see the desperate, agonizing regret bleeding through his exhausted stare. He takes a half step forward, perhaps expecting me to sneer at him, to hurl angry insults, or to finally gloat over his spectacular downfall. But I don't give him anything. I don't smile. I don't frown. I don't even pull back on the reins to pause. I just look at him with the cold, absolute detachment you would give to a piece of trash on the side of the road. Then I gently press my heels into my horse's flanks, turn away from the gas station, and ride straight toward the rising sun. People often think that the ultimate victory is utterly destroying your enemies, watching them suffer and scream in the dirt. But the most ruthless, classy revenge in this world isn't driving your enemies to their deaths. It is quietly, methodically stripping them of the grand illusions they so desperately craved, and then calmly stepping out of the mud to live a fiercely proud, untouchable life. To every woman listening to this, never let sweet words become a blindfold. Love your partner, but love yourself enough to read every single document before you sign your name. Equip yourself with financial knowledge, understand your legal rights, and never, ever surrender the keys to your own survival. Because when the storm finally hits, your knowledge is the only armor that will keep you from drowning.